juz. The 15th juz contains Surah Al-Isra, also known as Surah Bani Israel, and it contains a portion of Surah Al-Kahf. Today, I wanted to focus my energy on Surah Al-Isra. There are a few interesting tidbits, and then there are also 14 points that I would like to go through that we should all be observing in our day-to-day life. Before the 14 points, one interesting thing that I found when I was going through the surah was in the 16th ayah of the surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whenever we intend to destroy a society, we command its elite to obey Allah, but they act rebelliously in it. So the decree of punishment is justified and we destroy it utterly. Meaning that social degeneracy takes place before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishments. And that social degeneracy is born from the elites of that society. Historically speaking, whenever any society has fallen into social and moral degeneracy, it was always a top-down effect. You had governments, ruling classes, the wealthy of that society pushing ideals that are morally degenerate, and they plague the rest of society. You look at this very country, for example, the notions of LGBT propaganda, white supremacy, right? Zionist support. Where does that all come from? It does not come from the people. It does not come from the bottom. It comes from the very top. And to counterweigh that, whenever there have been movements to cleanse a society, to purify a society, to improve a society, any sort of revolution, right, has always come from the bottom. It has always been people resisting the top. This is why when Islam came to the people of Mecca, they resisted it. Who resisted it? Not the poor, not the needy, but the people on top. People like Abu Jahl, people like Abu Sufyan, people like Abu Lahab, who profited off of polytheism, right? The people who are in power will always resist change because it threatens them. Juxtaposed to this, when they inflict moral degeneracy on a society, when they rebel against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it serves them in the end that they increase in power, because a powerful man only ever wants more power. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them commandments, and they reject those commandments, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes them. So on that same vein, there are 14 points in Surah Al-Isra that Islamic societies are built off of, right? The Islamic state that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ruled over was built off of these points, and these are points that we should apply to ourselves, to any organization that we run, right? Especially political parties. These are points that we have to keep in order to be successful and in order to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'll go through them quickly. Firstly, and most obviously, is that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we associate no partners with Him, right? There's not much that has to be said in this regard. Next is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this surah, He commands us to treat our parents with ihsan. What is ihsan? Ihsan is defined as excellence of character, and ihsan is defined as doing everything beautifully, right? We understand from this that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people who are revered as the highest, especially for us, are our parents. Next is you give your haqq, or you give the haqq to your relatives, to the needy, and to travelers. Right? What does this mean? There's a portion of your wealth that goes towards the needy, there's a portion of your wealth that goes towards your relatives, and a portion of your wealth that goes towards travelers, right? It is customary as Muslims that when travelers come into our city, we host them, we take care of them, we make sure that they're comfortable. Back before hotels were made, the Arabs used to host them in their own homes. And when it comes to our relatives, we take care of them. We do not cut the ties of kinship. And of course, we are taught over and over and over again to take care of the needy, especially knowing that zakah is one of the pillars of Islam. You have to give zakah in order to be a Muslim. We also do not weaponize our favors, right? We never do somebody a favor with the expectation that they will pay us back. Shaykh Ammar Shukri told me of a story where a man donated a lot of money to a masjid. And after he donated all of this money, he started parking his car wherever he wanted. And when the masjid asked him to stop, he said, "Don't you know who I am? Like, my money built half of your masjid. I gave you your funding." To which the masjid said, okay, you can have it back. We don't need your money, right? We never ever do something for anybody with the expectation that they will do something in return for us. It is always out of our generosity. We do not weaponize favors, especially considering your wealth is not from you. It is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you your rizq, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decreed how much will go to whom. Next is you do not spend needlessly, and you do not underspend. Whenever in Islam you have two clear polar opposites, the answer will always be in the middle. So you don't overspend, right? You don't spend on things that you don't need. You don't spend on things that are more than what you make, right? A lot of people fall into debt because they spend more than what they make on things that they don't necessarily need, right? And this is why a lot of people in this country specifically, unfortunately, accrue a lot of interest-based debt, right? Because they spend on their credit cards more than what they make, and the banks then profit off of the interest that they owe. And we don't underspend, right? If my car has its front bumper hanging halfway off, right? My tire hubcaps are always falling off. I have to spend to take care of myself, right? We don't live with the mentality of, oh, let it be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of it. No, we have to go out of our way. We have to take care of ourselves while also keeping in mind that we don't spend too much. Next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if you have nothing to give to a needy person, then you leave them with a kind word. You do not insult them, you do not berate them, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they come across beggars, when they come across somebody who's needy, we turn very harshly away from them, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if you cannot take care of them, then the very least you can do is you leave them with a kind word, okay? All of these points that I mentioned previously tell us that our money is not just for us. We live in a very hyper-capitalistic society where we're taught, worry about yourself, everybody for himself, it's a rat race. This is not an Islamic principle. Yes, we take care of ourselves. Once we have fulfilled our rights upon ourselves, then we take care of those around us, our neighbors, our family, the needy in our community, right? We are taught to take care of each other after we take care of ourselves and we have sustained ourselves. Next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about infanticide. Do not kill your children out of fear of poverty because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sustain you. In our context, this has a lot to do with abortions. Over 90% of abortions that are performed in the United States are performed because either the parents felt that they were not ready or they said that they could not afford to raise a child, right? And simply put, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly warned us against this. Why? Because as I mentioned previously, rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever you make comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not from you. It is an amana that you get from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And back then, a lot of the Quraysh used to bury their children alive, specifically daughters, right? And some because they were afraid that they could not afford this. In China, until recently, they had their one-child policy, right? A lot of countries are encouraging families to limit how many kids they have, right? Or in China, until recently, they would take kids away if they were more than one because of fears of overpopulation. When our attitude should be not to cut down on populations, but to see how we can work to take care of and facilitate those populations, right? So do not kill your children out of infanticide, or to put it very bluntly, don't get abortions if you're broke. This is not an Islamic practice, and this is something that is blatantly haram. Scholars have mentioned that infanticide is the biggest it is the biggest sin after shirk. Next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. He doesn't say do not commit zina, he says do not go near zina. Do not partake in any activities that can take you towards zina, right? And what can this mean in our context? Things like DMing somebody of the opposite gender, right? It could be something as simple as, hey, can you help me with my homework? Or wasn't that meeting so boring? Or, Assalamu alaikum brother, can you show me the way to my house? Whatever the case is. There are things that seem very, very innocent and very, very simple that in reality are a trick from shaitan to lead us towards zina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't even go near zina, right? If there are mixed festivals, for example, we are having a lot of Muslim festivals this year that are full of fitna and fasad, right? There are insanely free mixed crowds with people who are not wearing modest clothing and people who are not behaving in a modest fashion that is appropriate for a Muslim, right? So we understand this. We understand that there are so many gateways for zina and haram here, and so we take that proactive step to stay away from these things. And the last point that I will make before I conclude, because we're short on time, is just like in Surah Al-Hujurat, as I mentioned last year, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not act on information unless it is confirmed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us once more in Surah Al-Isra that do not act on anything unless you are certain. Do not follow anything until you are certain. Do not get behind anything until you are certain, so that we do not make mistakes. Always, as Muslims, we confirm information. We never believe in rumors. We never believe in baseless accusations. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, we hate somebody and somebody tells us a rumor about them and we're inclined to believe them because of our hatred for that person. This is something that is absolutely inappropriate for us to do. There are careers that are destroyed, reputations and businesses that are destroyed, and so we must always remember to remain objective. And I will end my talk here as it is time for Isha. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم.